So I want to welcome you to our 8th panel of the month. And there are a few changes I wanted to let you know about. One is that Jerry Fromm will join us in about 10 minutes. He is in a meeting now, and Oleksandr will have to leave us at 8:30. So it's a little confusing, but you'll bear with us, and we can keep the meeting until 9 o'clock. Anyway, I wanted to, as I usually do, make a summary of the previous meetings so that there's a kind of bridge from one meeting to another, because we've had in each meeting such very rich discussions, but it's been over a month, and I would imagine some of you might remember something and others less. So let me start with telling you that Alexander Filts introduced the panel last time with the observation that our meetings have truly broadened our perspectives and have given us space, maybe more potential space, to discuss cases at the front line of psychoanalysis. I think we are in a process of creating a new history with one another, within which we are writing a new chapter of what it takes to conduct therapy under and within conditions of a very brutal war. Last time, we were privileged to hear his case story of a 40-year-old woman who had been hiding in the Kherson region for nearly 8.5 months, while Kherson was under attack from the Russian army. She had survived this long-lasting, fierce attack by hiding in different cellars, only to emerge at night to search for food and water. When Sergei Kiryolak met with her over the telephone for the first time, he immediately established with her whether she had finally found a safe location in Kiev. He conducted the therapy from Lviv, and this 40-year-old woman was in Kiev. So two key events stood out from her time in hiding in the basement in Kherson. One was she knew that she was wanted by the Russians because of her university position, and hence she knew that she had to hide at all costs. During her concealment, she was a witness to many brutalities and almost lost twice the safety of her hidden spot. One when she heard a soldier screaming in Ukrainian language, "Come out, it is safe." Yet something told her correctly that this statement was false and that she had heard the voice of a collaborator with the Russian army. The other situation was when she had resisted the urge to kill the 3 Russian soldiers who stood outside her hiding place. Given her past training in the martial arts, she was quite certain that she could have killed them, but she resisted this violent urge with a great restraint. And when Kherson was finally liberated by the Ukrainian army, she could leave for Kiev, from where she sought help with Sergei, therapist from last time, who was a psychoanalyst and a priest at the same time. So the things we learned from Sergei's treatment of this remarkably courageous woman was, one, he gave her the structure of 7 separate meetings over the phone, where she was at first at liberty to choose at what interval she wanted to meet with him. The first 2 sessions were taking place during 2 subsequent days. They were largely reserved for narrating her history and her experiences in the basement. The 3rd session was already a few weeks later, initially conducted from inside a car, within which she drove with a companion to a rape center, where she wanted to become a witness to their plight and be of help to them. So he, like Dr. Fedorets, really took the lead of her. He didn't say, "Come to me," but he went to where the patient had to go. So Sergei gave her the structure and freedom at the same time. Then he waited for her when she put him on hold, and he developed a very useful metaphors to digest and symbolize her horrendous experiences about which she had talked to him in the previous sessions. He said he grew more brave and compared her overwhelming experience with those of an oil tanker on a stormy sea, which carries the oil in the middle of the tanker, surrounded by different, often empty carriers around it, so that the oil tanker does not risk going under, spilling the oil during a rough storm. This metaphor of an oil tanker helped his patient, and I think himself, to contain the anxiety, establishing the precursors of a transference relationship between the two of them. During the third session, when the patient made Sergei wait for 20 minutes while she drove in a car with her friend, instead of sort of seeing this as an acting out, or perhaps as we would usually think of a defense against the therapy, Sergei, used this time to think about how he could devise a plan to help her better. So instead of only supporting her, he thought it would be most helpful to encourage her to become a witness to her own thoughts and memories, and a witness to experiences of other people's horrendous experiences, i.e. the drive to the rape center. In other words, he encouraged her in her role as a historian, since this was the field of her study, and in her role as a witness. So Sergei arrived at another useful metaphor, fairly unknown to us, I have to say, in the West, which was a metaphor standing on three whales, which she described as the one whale she was standing on was apathy and helplessness, and the other one was irritation and productiveness. Together, Sergei and the patient found a third whale, the usefulness of her anxiety. Speaking of his own anxiety and sharing his emotional state with her, Sergei underscored the usefulness of anxiety in the creative process. He says, when anxiety abandons me, I stop being creative. So in the discussion of Sergei's case, both Françoise, Davoine, and Gerard commented on the creative use of these metaphors developed in the treatment, very spontaneously, of course. The metaphor of the oil tanker, of the whales, and also the usefulness of the therapist's countertransference, that he shared his own anxiety with her, and the therapist's encouragement in her role as a witness to the war's atrocities. Both invoked Dory Laub, that it is necessary to become a witness to events that have had no witness before, and also to ask the question, or to allow the question to the patient of who are you? Who is this person that I'm meeting with? So the patient's use of other identities, not just the identity of being a victim of the war, helped her, we thought, survive these grueling months in hiding, as well as the memory of her own near-death experience when she had been diagnosed with leukemia at age 20. So since Dory Laub is an analyst who's been quoted by Jerry, by Françoise, and also by Ghislaine, I do want to finish with a quote by him, which I think is very helpful for this work. Dory says in an essay called Testimony, that the listener to the narrative of extreme human pain, of massive psychic trauma, faces a unique situation. In spite of the presence of ample documents, of searing artifacts, and of fragmentary memoirs of anguish, he comes to look for something that is in fact non-existent, a record that has yet to be made. Massive trauma precludes its registration. The observing and recording mechanisms of the human mind are temporarily knocked out. They are malfunctioning. The victim's narrative, the very process of bearing witness to massive trauma, does indeed begin with someone who testifies to an absence, to an event that has yet not come into existence, in spite of the overwhelming and compelling nature of the reality of its occurrence. Also, okay. More slowly? So, what should I do? Was soll ich machen? Okay. So anyway, with that citation from Danylo, I do want to introduce you to our new presenter, who is Julia Diakonenko, who is a psychotherapist in the field of child and youth studies, and she works right now in Germany with Ukrainian refugees at an organization that is called Menschenmögliches, which means all that's possible for human beings. So she will enlarge, as Oleksandr said at the beginning, the perspectives that are existing in this war, and this time will give us maybe a perspective of the war, but from outside of the Ukraine. So please welcome Julia, and let us hear your case.
Hello, or good morning, whichever time it is where you are. First of all, I would like to thank you for this opportunity of taking part in this discussion and to hear different opinions about my case I would like to present today. I will tell you a little bit about myself, some personal information. I'm from Zaporizhia, and last year, okay, I'll start with 2014. In 2014, it was the first time I met with refugees, because that was the first time where we started seeing this phenomenon and what it looks like. In 2014, many refugees and internally displaced people came from Crimea and Donetsk region. And then we needed more. Why not? Can you hear me, please? English speakers, can you?
Okay. Okay.
Jeanne, can you hear me?
Now I can.
Okay.
Now I
good.
can. Now only. I did not
Yeah,
hear.
could you maybe sum up what Julia has said so far? I'm sorry
Julia
about
was
this.
saying that she okay, Julia was saying that she comes from Zaporizhia, and the first time they ever encountered refugees and internally displaced people was in 2014, when people started coming to Zaporizhia from Crimea and from Donetsk, from Donbas region. And that's when they needed to find some tools to help those people. Okay?
Okay, thank you.
Але так повільно. In 2022, I became a refugee myself. Last year, in March last year, I had to leave Ukraine and go to Germany. And due to support from my German colleagues, I was able to overcome many issues pretty soon and start working in Germany. Presently, I'm working twice a day in camps with refugees, twice a week, I mean. I work also in my office where I can see Ukrainian refugees, and they come because it's a charity, so they
excuse me
come.
for one moment. I'm not able to block. I'm hearing both the English and the Ukrainian version simultaneously.
So the refugees who come to Germany, they are really confused and they don't know what to do next. Many people come with trauma, with mental trauma, haven't been through a few months or even a year of occupation. There are really different cases that we're having. And today I would like to present a case of an 18-year.
In progress.
Oh, yeah. Julia, I have a question too, and then I want to ask Françoise and Jerry, but could you tell us a little bit about your experience of becoming a refugee in Germany, in Essen, and what it's and how you found this job, and what are sort of the circumstances of working in this camp? If you could tell us a little bit more about your own experience and also your experience to work with fellow refugees.
Okay, how I ended up in Germany. I used to live in the suburb of Zaporizhia, and when they started shooting at the nuclear plant, we decided we had to leave. I left with my daughter, and our husband stayed in Ukraine. Many of my colleagues, psychologists, live in the vicinities of Essen, so they invited me over and helped me settle down. Okay, the circumstances of my work is that we started helping Ukrainian refugees in various ways, including social help, going to institutions, arranging things. And then we went to this charity. They had some difficulties with the arriving Ukrainians, and they are psychologists, and they realize that they need psychological help in these camps. And we work as family therapists. It's most of the time we devote to counseling, and we are not limited in our work to certain numbers of counseling. And this girl is not in the camp. She lives in a flat, and they come to my office. She's not in the camp. Her sister and they're more or less adjusted. And they started taking courses of German language. And the older sister has friends. And the younger sister also has friends, but she doesn't really feel like doing anything. Like she would go to spend time with her friends in order to do drugs. But now that she can't do that anymore, she does see her friends, but she doesn't really want to do that most of the time.
Okay.
I have
Françoise.
a question. Does she speaks about how does she speaks about her brother? But because she's like in the death with him, lying on the bed without any interest outside. So, what was told to her the way he died? The doctor that she saw. She has no burial, as you said. Does she mention him in some, even in past times? Does she tell you about him?
the doctor, it was her older sister who talked to the doctor, who told them about their brother's death. Why my client didn't talk to him? Because that's what her older sister said. She said she was going to talk with him by herself. So, so nobody really told her the story of his death. And the official version is that his machine gun blew up because of overheating, and he was wounded, and the doctor would attend to him, and at that time they were taken captive, and the doctor saw that her brother was dead by the time they were taken captive. She talks very little about him. For example, about this guitar. At first she came and she boasted that she felt like doing something finally, that she got this wish to play the guitar. And then we were talking about the guitar, and she said that her brother could play the guitar in the past tense, that he taught himself, and he only tells me good things about him. He is every time she talks about him, it seems to me he was her grown up. All this time while her older sister wasn't around, he was taking care of her. Before she told me about his death, she said that she would fight with him for his because he was trying to discipline her. Like, he was just a year older, why would he order me around? And when she was telling me this, I didn't realize yet he was dead. Because at first she was talking in the present tense about him.
Now she still speaks on the present tense?
No, not anymore.
Not anymore.
Not anymore. Yes, right now she after the anniversary of his death, she started talking about him in the past tense.
Yeah. So now it's 1 year. The anniversary was 1 year after. Did they do something about like Alexander Federetz, I remember, talked about, putting a cross in the place where on the dugout where people had disappeared. Did they do something, like inventing some ritual?
The ritual, I would say, it was coming more from our conversations, because we were discussing to what extent it was necessary. And I just remembered she asked me if that was going to help her older sister. And they did remember him. It's a remembrance ritual we have. We cook the deceased favorite food. We sit down and light a candle and remember the good things from the past about the deceased. But we also have this ritual on the 3rd day, on the 9th day, and the 4th day after death. But they only did it for the anniversary of his death, because at that time they did not realize that he was dead.
Until when?
When 49 and 40 days after his death, they did not realize he was dead, so they didn't keep this ritual.
Okay.
Only after a year after he died. Because the tradition is to keep this ritual on the 9th day, on the 40th day, and then on the anniversary of death. You remember the dead
What's
people.
the ritual in that circumstance?
That you sit down and you cook food and the favorite food of the deceased, and you remember them.
And did she tell you what she remembered of him, or was it only with her sister?
No, she didn't give me the details. She just said that this was the first time they cried together, because before that they used to cry each on their own. It's as if they sit down together and cry. It's going to sound like admitting his death. And this was the first time when they sat down and cried together on the day of his death.
I just finished, but perhaps she could. I was struck by the impossibility to draw only an outline, but this outline is something. What to do with this outline as a start to try to inscribe something, you know? Perhaps like his name on a grave, or perhaps, you know, some inscription, because the cemetery is very far away, there is no cemetery, but perhaps you could do that with you, in your place, as the place where his name could remain. It's a little simple, but I think it's important, you know, from that outline, how to continue this inchoative, I don't know the word in English, this beginning of a drawing, this could be soothing, you know. Look at the people who disappear at sea. You don't have their body, but you can inscribe or tell a story to you, not only because what you said of her sister was she tried to help her sister. She's always in the second, as the little one, I think the second position. And her sister withdrew, but for her, it's with you that it is important.
I think this is a good idea. I think because it's even hard for them to put up his photograph, and if we draw something, maybe it'll be a little easier.
Yeah.
An epitaph of a kind.
Yeah. You know, in my experience of psychoanalysts with either, you know, like her, people who go to hospital or to have drugs or to, well, there is always a trauma somewhere. And I always find my office like the place where the ghost can find a rest, like when you arrest by their story being inscribed. Good things, not only bad things, not only horrifying things, also the good memories or the good souvenir. But it takes a long time. And probably now she's she's one with him for the moment. He's part of her. And he does not do that to annoy her. He wants to be put to rest. And, you know, at your place, with you, because you are outside of the family, trying to help this one or or the niece.
So aren't you saying, Françoise, that Julia is the outline?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that she has to draw a line. Yeah. In
both.
this, I mean, to play on the
Both,
on the
yes.
different meanings of outlines. Yeah. A marker line. I was thinking. I think Oleksandr Fedorets is listening too. This is exactly what he, as you remember, did with the young soldier.
I think
Yeah, who was. That's very helpful.
I always quote the etymology of therapist in Greek, which means the second in combat, but also the second role of therapist, therapon, is the one who is in charge with the funeral duties, because at war, the danger is always to let the bodies without any care, you know, and that's the worst, so that they have to be cared for. And that is, I think it's my job when I'm with people who deal with disappeared people, or, you know.
Wouldn't it be, Françoise, wouldn't it also be another level, the sort of the activity of inscription?
It is the inscription.
Right, but beyond the level of what they have done so far, which eat the food. So it would sort of maybe move ahead from having eaten him, so to speak, to inscribing him. If she now begins to draw. I don't know what that is. George, you wanted to say something?
Actually, you just mentioned it. This business about eating him. It's one of the versions of cannibalism. One of the kinds of cannibalism is, in fact, to incorporate, and it depends on who's being, what culture it's in, incorporate, in any case, your friends or your loved ones, or the people you respect. And she has not only done that, she's also incorporated him in terms of the guitar. And she brings all this to treatment. And perhaps she would like to be saved as if she were being saved in his name, as she would like to have saved him. It sounds complicated. I also have a question, though. How frequently are her sessions?
Twice, I think. I think she said twice a week she sees him. Her.
Okay.
No, once a week.
Oh, once.
Once a week.
Can you tell her to draw something for you when in the between?
I sometimes do try to give her kind of tasks, but it's really hard for her to do something with her hands. Because, and therefore, I didn't even ask her to try doing something besides lying down. I gave her things to color, but she cannot even do that. She cannot draw or color things. It's hard for her, but when she's in my office, I can try doing that. Because in my office, she agreed to do it once, and she did that, and it was not a kind of resistance. She just wanted to draw less and talk more. And through this drawing, she told me quite a lot about her childhood.
Oh, sorry, just one more thing. When I have somebody who, when she leaves the room, she is in the void, like she seems to be, in a total loneliness, which lasts for quite a long time. I sometimes give her something from my office, or a little thing to keep, and then she knows I think of her. We're linked, and she can bring it or keep it to make a link between the inside and the outside, which is, do you think that could be useful?
I think we could try doing that. Or maybe making something in my office like of clay, because I work a lot with clay with children, and she could make something she could take home.
Yeah.
We could also make a painting or a drawing. Something she could hang in her room.
Alexander, Alexander, what did you say?
To give something of her own, of Julia's.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
A piece of her own. Yeah.
Yeah, a present from me.
No, it's
Oh, yeah,
not a
we could
present.
arrange it.
No, not a present.
It could be
Yeah.
a pen, or it could be, something not worth. It's not a gift. It's a link. It's the link that in her total loneliness, there is something of you.
Françoise, but don't you think it's a good thing if Julia works with clay, that they do something together that then she can take home?
Yes, it's also a
You
good
know?
idea.
Yeah.
Bring it back. So it should be,
Mm.
use it in between.
Transitional object.
Yeah.
Jerry, what about you? What are your thoughts or questions you might have for Julia?
Yes. Well, well, I was always hearing Oksana and Julia at the same time.
Oh,
And I heard Julia much better than I heard Oksana, but I don't really understand Ukrainian. So I have no idea what patient I'm really talking about if I make comments, but I'll do that anyway in a moment. But I wanted to ask, I don't think I heard anything about the patient's father.
yeah.
And I wondered
heard that correctly.
If Julia might say something to Oksana about the patient's father, and Oksana, then you could tell us.
When the client was 2 or 3, her father left the family and didn't keep in touch anymore. The only thing I know, and I don't know how valid it is, but the client thinks that her father is in Russia.
Okay. Okay. Well, here are just a couple of thoughts. And by the way, just a quick story about Dory Laub. When Dory Laub was a candidate in psychoanalysis at the Western New England Institute, he was not yet a citizen of the United States. And he was terrified that if he didn't do well at the Institute, he would be deported back to Europe. And having been in a concentration camp himself, he felt that would be his death. And so there was a lot of pressure he felt for his analysans, his training cases, to do well. And the first training case he had was a very difficult woman who was very aggressive with him, very critical. And because he felt this was a potential failure of the treatment, he worried he would lose his place in the institute. And then suddenly the patient did well for a while, was very calm, was relatively collaborative. She did quite well. And then she stopped doing well and she began to attack him again. What happened? What was the difference? It's kind of amazing, actually, what the difference was. The patient started doing well when Dory's supervisor went on vacation. And when the supervisor came back, the patient started fighting again. This pattern happened for a while before anybody realized what was going on. And at some point, Dory began to wonder about the fact that he never heard anything about the patient's father during her childhood until a certain age. And he began to wonder, where was the father during this childhood? And it turned out the father was in a Japanese concentration camp. And so Dory began to think, I never asked about this because I didn't want to hear about this father's disappearance and suffering, because it reminds me so much of mine. And by the way, it reminded the supervisor so much of his.
Mm.
So there was a way in which neither Dory nor the supervisor could become curious about where the father was because of experiences in their own lives that they couldn't stand to think about. I mean, that occurs to me, partly because we are thinking about Dory today, but also partly because this father disappeared when the patient was perhaps 3, but a lot happens in a child's life in those first 3 years. And the fact that he's imagined to be on the other side, a betrayer in a sense, may be very important to her. And who knows where her brother is in all of this, or was in all of this, and what his psychology was about the father. He became the father in the family to this little girl. So that's one piece that I've been thinking about. There are a couple of other pieces. It sounds like, Julia, you're working with a kind of, understandably complicated mourning process here. And what Françoise has been talking about is helping with that. And if you, go back to Freud and Mourning and Melancholia, he raises the question of how much there are not just good things about the person who died, but not so good things about the person who died. And what happens when memories of the not so good things come to this young woman who misses her brother so much? Is that part of the complicated mourning process? And then I guess the final thing for now is her role in the family. Sounds like she's the youngest. And sometimes the role of the youngest person in the family is to keep the family together. But this family is, fragmented all over the place. And I wondered about the fact that she can help her sister, but I wonder if she can help herself, if she feels allowed to help herself. It was very striking to me. You say to her, please stop taking drugs in order for us to work together in therapy. She agrees to that, and she soon thereafter gets into a relationship with a young drug-taking man. And, I was thinking about, and as I said, I didn't hear a lot of this, so I don't really know what I'm talking about. But I was thinking about the notion of the negative therapeutic reaction. That is, the person's terrible, terrible ambivalence about being helped because they don't deserve to be helped. And I wondered about that. George alluded to this, perhaps her survivor guilt, her failure to save her brother, whatever, all of these things, so that when she comes to you and joins a helping relationship, she also has to find a relationship which pulls her back and pulls her down. A kind of ill brother that she has alongside herself. And maybe a person who, in a sense, in the way he treats her, punishes her for what she has failed to do in her life, in terms of saving her brother. So in other words, you might be up against a kind of negative therapeutic reaction here, a person who wants help but feels she doesn't deserve it. And that too is a kind of complication of the mourning process, because she has to have her ill brother with her side by side. Getting better would mean leaving him, burying him, inscribing things, and moving on. And that's not a place she's ready to go yet, is one thought I've been having.
Yes, Jerry, and there is also in this reaction a way to that, Danylo was Ukrainian. He was from Chernovitz. I don't know the name today. And he was deported in Romania at 6 on the river Berg, I don't know. And so he always say, as Jeanne said at the beginning, you quoted him, they always ask, who are you? Implicitly or explicitly. And she is observing you at the same time. How did you succeed to be such a, to be a refugee and have a job and so, and of course, she's also rejecting, trying to test if you are going to survive. There is quite a lot of a test, a challenge. Will you survive? Not the war, but death, refuge, and so on. So you could speak about yourself in those occasions a little. When you see a little mirror.
You mean survival in exile?
Yeah, because those people, and have no mirror. And she had by the past difficulty with her figure, with her shape, and so on. And well, that's what I do. I don't know. It's not a general method, but it's very important to hand a first little mirror, like we do with babies. Babies without somebody answering and reacting has no mirror at all. And so if you can give some clues that connect you together on positive levels of survival.
Yeah.
What it takes to survive. And I usually share little details. I don't tell my life, but it's very important. Suddenly I'm no more mad. I'm no more a case. I'm no more a drug addict or, all those labels. There is somebody which has a minimal mirror link with me.
Françoise, may I say something adding to this? So you're saying that Julia has to become more of a person to her.
Yeah.
Not just a therapist and client.
Yeah.
And I think it's given because I think we've forgotten by now how terrible a mother she had.
Yeah.
Who, filled her with negative mirror images, of course, right? She's fat, she's ugly, she's not, she doesn't deserve anything. And I think on top of it, following up what Jerry is saying, if they think that the mother is still on the Crim, isn't it possible to think that both parents, in fact, the father being in Russia, the mother, they say, has no clue, but it's quite possible that she's also on the enemy's side. So here she has two parents. One she's lost when she was young, and then this mother who was kind of like an enemy to her, maybe having also joined the enemy's lines territory. So I think that all the more does she need some positive outlinings or little mirrors from you to sort of sustain something inside of her.
You know, I just to join that, Jeanne, you know, there's the little positive mirrors and linkings. There's also, Françoise, from your point of view, what you call the, in a sense, the mirroring transference,
Yeah.
meaning that these are two people dislocated from their homes, in that sense, going through something very similar, and in a sense, whatever coincidences of experience arise in that shared problem of being exiles in a certain way or refugees might be very, very valuable to the building of the therapeutic relationship.
You know, yeah, go on.
But just want to add one piece to it that may.
Oleksandr, what do you want to say, Oleksandr? You have to leave?
I have to excuse myself because I'm going to be disconnecting. Now I just wanted to share an idea of mine. I thought that the fact that her brother was serving as a kind of a father to her, and she was sort of transferring these fatherly functions. And now that her her brother is dead and her father is in Russia, she might have a fantasy that her father could have been among those who brought about her brother's death, because he, well, not literally. And this would have been a double trauma for her, and maybe that's why she cannot even speak about it. And I thought to myself that the therapeutic role is really important here, and what Gerard and Françoise and Jeanne were saying, because the therapist, and she could dare think about these really difficult fantasies. And I'm really sorry to be leaving. And I will be, okay, I will listen to the summary of the case.
We'll see you on the 24th, Oleksandr. We'll see you on the 24th. Bye-bye.
I have another question. Bye-bye, Oleksandr. I have another question. You know, she is the closest to her brother. But he had also a body at war, you know, and the importance of the body is, so there is another person mourning him the same way she does. Do they have some contact with his comrades of the same regiment, through his commander? Because I know when people come back, they usually gather together. They don't like other people to come. Does she have a clue of who were his comrades?
Unfortunately, although his commander was the only wife who survived, because more of them were taken captive, but just the commander and the doctor survived. And he didn't know the details about her brother's death, because he probably communicated with the doctor, and there are nobody else survived, unfortunately.
And the doctor did not speak to her, but he spoke to her older. She couldn't ask questions herself.
Right, right.
And do you think she could contact this doctor?
She will not. That's not possible because after captivity, he is still involved in his work and he does not contact them and he wouldn't give any additional information. And it was a really a great task to arrange for this only meeting. He's also a renowned physician in Ukraine.
George, you had a question. You have a question. Unmute. We can't hear. Unmute, George.
Yes. Okay. It's less a question, but just in the interest of a bit more discussion. This is not just a case of war trauma. As a matter of fact, it seems to me primarily a case of someone who has some kind of disturbance, which then gets affected by what happened to her and her family as a result of the war. And the more I think about her, and I hear things like the mirror, and she needs a mirror, and so on and so forth, and she's very ready to take it as well, as Françoise pointed out. Ask her to stop taking drugs, bam, she stops taking drugs, and even more, she stops smoking, she stops drinking, I have the impression that she not just needs a mirror, she needs an identity. I have, in fact, the impression I can't do this work really without making a diagnosis. And my diagnosis, at least, obviously, I'm not in a position, having never spoken with her, but my diagnosis is more somebody along a borderline structure. And somebody along a borderline structure is in need of an identity. The problem with dealing with these people, though, is that some of them do it the other way around, but some of them think that they're going to get an identity from the therapist or from the analyst. And it never happens because they're simply incapable. And the goal of treatment is to try to get them to find an identity and indeed find out why they don't have an identity and so on and so forth. So that to me, it seems that one of the dangers of treating people with that kind of problem is to be a little bit too supportive. And I hear the therapist feels like a mother and so on and so forth and would like to prop her up. I'm not sure whether that in the long run is going to be as fruitful for this young patient as it would be if the mother were a little bit less supportive, not confrontational, but just to try to get to this young lady's core. What is, in a sense, something I don't know, what's going on in her unconscious that is keeping her the way she is, trying perhaps to find one identity with the dead brother in some ways, and now with the therapist. So that I believe my approach would possibly be a little bit different, maybe very different from Françoise, but I'm interested in what you have to teach me about my thinking.
Could I jump in there, Jeanne?
Please.
Absolutely. Yes, Jerry.
Well, I appreciate George's reminding us that all trauma occurs to a person who's had a life before the trauma.
Yeah.
In other words, there are always pre-existing conditions, so to speak. There was a study done about marriages in the US after 9/11, the ones that broke up and the ones that didn't. And the main difference was the state of the relationship on 9/10. Okay, so if things were okay, relatively speaking, on 9/10, they survived the trauma. If there were fault lines, there were divorces. But I would want to think about less that this patient needs an identity, and more, what identity did she have when the trauma occurred? And it seems to me one hypothesis there is she had some identity as a younger child whose job was to help everybody and keep this family together. That identity has been traumatized along with the trauma of such serious acute loss. And so she may be, in a sense, in a state of a traumatized identity, having lost an identity that she cannot recover because she cannot recover her brother. So in a sense, I almost hear Françoise offering a variation on identity. And I was thinking, Françoise, about all you've written on Antigone. That is the responsibility of the daughter to bury the brother, no matter what those in charge say, no matter. And of, again, a word from your work, of kind of developing and holding on to a ferocity about what you're ethically bound to do in life, no matter what the people in charge say. And in this case, I'm partly referring to the people in charge being her mother and father, whose loyalty to things seems very shaky. You know, in a way, the whole issue of the burial and going through the mourning process could be heard as a different kind of identity for this patient. The original one of helping people was traumatized. What can she do now?
Exactly. Hearing you and George, there is a new identity. When every bearings have exploded, there is no more house. People come back from war. You don't recognize them. They are somebody else. And so the issue of identity is to create a new identity. And for that, you have to have another. And so it's from scratch that you create an identity there. How can you rely on the past? Even the past there is no more past. I was addressing this issue of time arrested time. And in her room, she's in an arrested time. So
Right.
how to put the time into motion? And that can be only by encountering somebody else, the analyst. But the analyst, you know, it's very, very, you don't say, oh, I'm here to listen to you, I'm very benevolent to you. No, she looks at you. She's trying, as Jerry said, to find the person beyond the professional. And I was thinking another help I can give, and it works, telling stories. When I have a patient who is very out, and there is either silence or a distraction and so on, I'm going to tell you a story, which comes to my mind on the moment. I did not prepare it. I love stories. So you create, so you have to imagine at their place. Imagination is just this English word, jeopardized. And you have to lend your imaginary world, because everything has been wiped out.
But Françoise,
can I also ask, Jerry, I was wondering, because in my screen, Oleksandr Fedorovich sits right next to you. And so I'm wondering, Oleksandr, whether you have had some thoughts, since we all have thought of your case as well, that you presented a few months ago, whether you have any thoughts about Yulia's case.
Thank you for remembering my case. I'm really, it's a great pleasure. I had many thoughts, but I also heard many interesting and intelligent ideas, and I was willing to listen to them. I have this remark that identity is based on identification. So now, when we think about this case, we think about trauma, but we have to distinguish that there's early trauma and current trauma. And her early trauma is her mother's neglect and negative mirroring of her daughter. The father who abandoned her, plain and simple. And these identifications of neglect and betrayal inside of betraying objects inside of her with whom she cannot identify. And I think that for her, she could identify with her good brother who died. There's a version of a living brother and a dead brother. And she tries to identify herself with her living brother because it's really painful to identify with her dead brother. And when I think about her trauma, I think first and foremost about loss of trust for objects and for yourself, your own desires and feelings. If a person cannot feel trust, then therapy is really complicated because the potential good object of therapist is felt as either felt as ideal or betraying, who does not live up to expectations. And there are risks in this therapy to endure these swaying from idealization to negative treatment in order to create a relationship you can rely on. Okay, I'm going to stop now.
Thank you. I just want to say I'm very glad you're there, because I'm trying as much as possible to get the people who have presented cases before to remain within our discussions, because that way we can play off one another and develop our cases together. So I'm very pleased you're back. Thank you. Jerry, you wanted to, I cut you off. I'm sorry, but
that's all right. And what I was thinking about may pick up on something Oleksandr just said, but I want to go back to what Françoise was saying, because it seems to, and I'll just back up for a second. I work, among other places, in what's called group relations. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the Tavistock methodology of groups. And there's a very famous consultation that one of the consultants in the large group supposedly gave to the group. And it goes like this: I don't know why you're mad at me. I'm not trying to help you. and people tend to understand intuitively what that means. And so what I just wanted to, Françoise has an idea of, for example, telling a story that might help this person, which I completely agree with, as long as it's, and you meant it this way, a kind of spontaneously arising association from your being with her. It's part of being with her. And it's not a kind of urgent effort to help her. Because if help happens, great, but that's not your agenda. And I think that's particularly important for a person who may be feeling that if I allow myself to be helped, I'm betraying my brother, because I have to be with him. I can't leave him just yet.
Yeah, if, as you are, I'm going to tell a little story. One of a very delusional patient I met in the public hospital. Her father was in the army of Mussolini in Egypt, in El Alamein, and he found all his comrades dead. He was away for that time. And of course, he looked at his daughter as his comrade. And so it was very difficult for her. Okay, I don't want to go into it, but after she was healed and had a new life, she told me, you know what was useful? Because I saw her in the hospital, in the day consultation, and in my office afterward, for no money almost. And she said, what was useful were the stories you told me, and also about yourself. Because when you tell a story, it's about yourself. And she said, your theories, I didn't understand, I didn't mind, but what was useful, I did not know. So that's why I insist on that. And it was also a question of the transmission of bloody wars.
We have about 20 minutes left. I'm wondering if there are any comments, observations, or questions from the larger audience. You've all been listening. So maybe there are some thoughts you want to share with us now.
Can I say something?
Oh, absolutely. You've
Uh,
got so many comments from us. Absolutely. Tell us.
I would like to go back to negative therapeutic reaction. Could you please elaborate a little more on that? Because you made this comparison with this boyfriend who is harmful to her and the harm of drugs. I didn't quite understand this. Could you tell us a little bit more about this and how to work with it, and maybe give some references to literature that we could use?
Jerry, I think it's a question addressed to you.
Oh, well, I don't know any references. I don't have, a particularly theoretical thought about it. Just that when she gets off of drugs in order to be in her therapy, she also finds somebody on drugs, a young man, who, in my mind, represents the pull of her dead brother to be with him, that she can't get help unless she also helps him. That's what I'm trying to say. And that in a certain sense, the goal of therapy for her is in conflict with helping her dead brother. Something like that. It's a form of survivor guilt, I think, but she hasn't yet survived. She's still very much caught up with him and maybe being punished by him in the way he treats her. So in other words, a kind of masochistic relationship is needed alongside the positive, helping, caring relationship of her therapy. Is that clearer?
Yes, I understand now. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
I have a little other way to look at it. I try. At some point, the therapy is like a war, because the patient has to fight a ruthless agency through the analyst. The ruthless agency without law, without any trust, with no truth, no trust. Totalitarian agency, a destructive other. And she can face it only with us, we are two. So we embody that sometimes. And the thing is to accept the fight and just say, for instance, that happens when you make a mistake, or when you make a little oblivion, or when you make a little thing that's not right. Boom, you are attacked. And that the thing is to name that, you know, this guy, he did not die in his bed. He was tortured. He was you know, a lot of happened. So probably there is a violence which is necessary to arrive in the session, not to provoke it. It's not regression at all. It is just to say, to name. It's not only the question of the brother, but also the enemy of the brother, which he deals with. And to name it, you distinguish yourself from it. I have been Mengele in some session. I have been Stalin in some sessions. I have been that. It's not pleasant at all. I try to avoid always, but that's one day you are facing that, and to name it, to say and tell a story about it or whatever on the situation, then time can start into motion, because there will be a past. She's in a memory which does not forget. She's in a memory which is stuck in the present time. And so the negative, what we call negative therapeutic reaction, is a positive fight to get how to defeat all the lack of faith, lack of you know, manipulation and so on. I don't know if you if I'm making.
Well, Françoise, no, I have another little version added to your version, which is, don't you think that this new boyfriend, the one that is where everybody says he's not good for her, the drug addict, not only is he representing maybe the brother who's dead, but it's also he's also a means of her to of an identification with a potential violence. You know, drug dealers do get into risky situations, so that there is a part in her that sought out this guy as a means of sort of evoking perhaps this violence, you know, that will then hurt her. Maybe once she has sort of dropped him, if she can do it, she can go on really forming a stronger identification with you, and, you know, maybe sensing that the relationship with you, the therapeutic relationship with you, is becoming a safer one. So I think this guy, this drug addict boyfriend, is sort of is a transitioning identity, a way to sort of begin to mourn this brother, but also to begin to identify with you.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, the idea of bringing that he represents in a certain way the war.
Oleksandr, what? You said something, Oleksandr?
If I may, another version
Oh yeah, the fourth.
about negative therapeutic reaction. I think that it happens in her history that all her objects, all potentially good objects, betrayed her. And I think
Mhm.
that a person who goes back on drugs chooses a drug as a surrogate of a good object I can control. And I think that this pattern is repeated in both in her relationship with food and with drugs. Something that seemed a good object to her food or her at a certain point she found it was dangerous and reached anorexia, and then she got scared, and the same thing happened with drugs. Maybe this young person knows how to control this, and maybe maybe I could learn how she can soothe herself with drugs, and she can cope with that. And maybe he attracts her by being able to control drugs, and also how traumatized and betrayed people find objects which are like their paternal and maternal figures who had treated them badly. And maybe this is the danger, and they try to make their bad objects better. Maybe that's the danger in that.
May I try another, a fifth version?
A fifth version?
Yes. Sorry, I came in late, but I just heard that maybe could be also an answer to the therapist. The therapist was saying, well, I don't want any drug here, and to push that away from the therapeutic scene. And next she comes back with the drug into the therapeutic space, and so then the interpretation would be that well, I understand that you want me to listen to the dark side, and so to take it as an answer to the fact that the therapist says, well, I don't want to have this here. So it could be a start of a dialogue between, well, I didn't want to, now it's back, so I have to accept it. And so to start it as a progressive dialogue that started with the no drug here.
Mm-hmm. Very good point. George, do you have a sixth version?
Not a sixth version, but because of what Françoise said, and maybe this is what you had in mind, Françoise, but it only just occurred to me, we haven't mentioned anything about her paranoia. The paranoia, the balcony's going to fall down on her head and this kind of thing, and and it seems to me, as frankly, I almost always start to think in those terms. If someone is afraid of something like that happening to them, way down deep inside, they believe it should be, usually because of how aggressive they are. And what Françoise said that tipped me off was, right now, I bet that she's a very pleasant woman when she comes, a very pleasant young lady when she comes to treatment. She smiles, she does mostly what we ask her to do, and she's clean and all of that. I think when she starts to get really angry in treatment, I think then we're going to be in deeper where she is and what underneath is one of the things that's so troubling to her. And as I think Jerry pointed out, it seems to usually be the case that the more troubled the relationship with the dead person was while they were alive, the more pathological and the deeper the mourning. And again, I think we have a lot of aggression that is yet to come out in this treatment. And it's when it begins to come out that the treatment is really going to get hefty, but it's going to be even more underway.
And you George, you asked Julia how often she saw the patient, and maybe when it gets heftier, it would certainly might be, if you can, be recommended that you see her more often, because to live with one session and then having to pass the whole week with all these feelings. So that's a hard thing to
Frankly,
cope
I
with.
would do it simply because I think twice a week treatment or
course.
3 times is more effective than once a week. I would
Yeah,
do it.
if you can. So we slowly have to wrap up, but I do want to give Julia another chance to respond to all the comments of at least 6 propositions about negative therapeutic reactions and other comments you've heard also from Dr. Federer, from George. Any comments, questions you still have before we have to wrap up?
My comments. Okay. I really enjoyed it tonight, and I got a lot of resource for myself. It's as if I had been sitting next to a really warm fire, and I heard many interesting thoughts, and I took many notes. And a host of these thoughts just are also my thoughts, and many things that I heard also evoked some protest in me, and I'll be thinking about the reason for that. That's the most interesting part, as usual. I would like to thank everyone, because it seemed to me that this encounter enabled me to see all the facets of this situation, and the current trauma and the trauma of her childhood. There are many questions about her identity and about how to work with this client, how to mirror her. I realized that. Thank you very much, Françoise, for this advice about drawing. And I never saw her draw or paint. I asked her to show me her paintings, but even that was the problem for her. I don't think I regarded this question as a need for this patient. Thank you. Thank you for this detailed explanation on negative therapeutic reaction, because this addicted boy showing up, I took him as a break of our agreement, and now I heard an opinion about that, because our agreement was about not using and about not harming herself. And this is the case where she seems to be looking for a relationship that might harm her, because he not only he does drugs, but he also humiliates her and is rude to her. And thank you about the comment on borderline personality. That was also very important, because I did not have a chance to hear an assessment from a psychiatrist here. Of course, I make some guesses, but it's really important if I get this confirmed from the outside. And I would also like to say a few words about aggression, that she needs to get mad. But I have to say that many refugees I'm working with today, it's really hard for them to express this aggression. And when, as a joke, I talk about aggression towards Russian authorities, they savor it. It's like a permission to at least joke about this, because many of them come from occupied territories where they stayed in different situations when in the daytime you had to say hello to Russians, to smile at them, and they would communicate with them. And then in the night, the Russians would leave the city, and then in the morning they would come back and they had to smile at them again. And this expresses the fear that they cannot get mad or say the truth about hating someone or something else. And this girl kept saying that her mother didn't understand things. And I think there are a lot of things about her mother and brother and this father supposedly in Russia. There are also a lot of hidden aggression because she spent quite a lot of time in Crimea where you couldn't say many things either, because she moved out when Crimea was already occupied. And so she's a refugee twice, actually. The first time when she left Crimea, and then when she had to leave Ukraine from. Thank you very much, everybody, for your warm support. It was really important.
Just a
Thank
question,
you.
a question to George, and thank you so much, Julia. That, but my question is not paranoia in the situation of occupied territories a normal attitude? If you are not paranoid, then you endure a lot of dangers. You have to be cautious always to who you are speaking. Who are you? And so this alertness, which is over developed, is necessary. Your life is hold, so paranoia in that sense is necessary.
So why don't we take that as our last statement to keep you all in line, since for me the whole really the signifier throughout this whole session has been outline, borderline, and stepping out of line or stepping over lines. And you just told us she's been a refugee twice, so she had to sort of move borders and move lines quite a few times in her life. Thank you very much, Julia, for a fascinating case again. Thank you, Oksana. You don't get enough thanks for the amazing work you do for us every time. And thank you, Françoise and Jerry. And thank you, Oleksandr Fedoretz. I hope you can join us again next time. And about next time is unusual because we're not meeting on Thursday. We're meeting on a Wednesday, and it will be May 24th at 7 o'clock Vienna time. It will be Ukraine time at 8 o'clock. So please remember this. We'll have a new case. And then, as I always say at the end, there's also the 2 accounts. We have one in Vienna and one in New York. If any of you want to donate some money for the Ukrainian refugees in Ukraine. Thank you so much.